Welcome to this episode of Implementing Best Practice in Business. We're here to help you and your organization understand and implement global best practice to help you face the business challenges of today. Join me, Richard Pharro, CEO of APMG International, in talking to leaders and practitioners who have applied these frameworks and practices to boost their productivity. They're here, willing to share their knowledge and experience to help you learn from them so you can do the same to make you more competitive in today's market. Today I'm delighted to be speaking to Sergey Samolis, who's one of APMG's PPP accredited trainers and has worked extensively in the UK and in Asia. But tell me, Sergey, what brought you to London?
Delighted to be here and talking to you, Richard. UK was part of my life for maybe a third of my life. I was here as a student in early 1990s, then worked at the Russian Embassy, economic section for some 5 years, and I had a degree, master's from Oxford University later, and 2015 we moved here as a family indefinitely. I'd say the reason why we moved was I wanted to expand my horizons beyond Russia, where I worked mainly before that. And I thought it was time to move from banks, which was my career for the last 10 years, to something more entrepreneurial. So that's the location. And also there was a bit of a family decision because my wife works at a UK based company, and that's what is a good choice for us.
So moving into public-private partnerships, you're able to combine your entrepreneurial spirit, your economic background, and generally help governments and the public sector procure projects better. Is that the purpose of the PPP program?
The PPPs as a type of procurement is something I'm really passionate about. So I've been dealing with infrastructure since 2004, I believe, so close to 20 years now. And PPPs from the moment it started in Russia. And I'm still fascinated by this subject. I find it very intellectually challenging and very emotionally rewarding. The deals of the magnitude that are typical for PPPs and complexity, for me, it's one of the ultimate thrills in life to be involved in negotiations and structuring deals. And there is a huge, of course, a huge element of doing the good for the society, because the projects are almost invariably transformational projects which serve the greater public. So yes, I believe as the procurement method, as the way of supplementing public funds with private funds, and it's not only about the money, more importantly, bringing the efficiencies of the private sector to publicly procured projects. I think it's a very worthy type of task to be involved in, to try to structure the best solution where the general public gets the benefits, but all the efficiencies of the private sector make sure it's done in the optimal way.
When you talk about your experience on that, it sounds as though you're a consultant and an advisor to various organizations, but I also know you do quite a lot of training on our CP3P program. So are you a trainer and an advisor, or are you a trainer and you want to get involved in that advisory role?
I started as in infrastructure before I knew the term PPP. I started as a member of an advisory team with a Russian private investor who invested in infrastructure, airports, railroad operations, etc. But then I moved into banking, and so for about 10 years, my perspective of PPPs was from the lender's side.
Right.
And but I always was fascinated by how it is initiated, how it is being done before a project deck and lands on the desk of a lender. When a lender first sees it, a lot has been done. So, in one of the banks I worked, Sberbank, the largest bank of Russia, I was managing director, head of infrastructure lending. We started the advisory line, and it's really important to make sure that projects can be structured from the outset in the way which is bankable for major banks, because it's a shame to see people having a year of negotiations of structuring and then just starting talking to banks just to realize what they were working on is not bankable. So that's my individual route from banking to advisory. And training for me started as like an enabling effort for advisory. Some of the deals we saw, some of the calls for advisory proposals by major financial institutions, they included capacity building training as an element. So to win advisory deals, you had to put forward a training element. When I got into that, first of all, it was much of it. And secondly, it turned out to be very exciting. And that's where I learned about CP3P. And I think in 2016, I first came to this building to meet with Helen Platt and to say that I'm a PPP professional. I heard that there is this scheme, and how do I get to be a trainer? That's how it started for me.
What a fascinating story. So when you've got people in the classroom, I mean, PPPs are complex, as you say, putting the deal together to make sure it's a fundable, a bankable project. But what can you achieve? What skills do people learn in the classroom when they're doing the CP3P program?
The CP3 program is a comprehensive program. It's a body of knowledge. It's the only universally acknowledged body of knowledge. And like in some areas, like project management, IT, you have competing international standards, complementing or competing. In PPPs, you have a few privately developed modular courses that you can take, but there is only one global certification, which was created by the financial institutions, which the multilateral development institutions that not only provide funds, but they also they provide the agenda. Like EBRD was the largest international investor in the Russian economy, and EBRD was and IFC were the parties that really spearheaded development of PPPs in Russia and many other regions. So they are the best, I would say, positioned people to say this is the body of knowledge, this is the global best practice, these are the useful cases. So actually, CP3P gives you an introduction to the framework of PPPs, to the conceptual understanding, what public-private partnerships are, and then it takes you through the whole life cycle of a project, from how you generate an idea about a PPP, through procurement, to projects, to project construction and operation. And it also faces with the key perspectives like finance and legal aspects, which are your typical professions in any PPP team. So it gives a two-tier introduction. The foundation level tells you about everything at a foundation depth level, and the professional level, which is your two follow-on exams, preparation and execution. They take you to a much higher level of proficiency, and very importantly, the exam structure is case analysis based. So it's about application of your understanding of the body of knowledge. So I would say I have no doubt that's the best framework for learning about PPPs. You can go much further, you can take many more courses, but as a sound foundation, that definitely is the one.
Oh, very interesting. So the people who come on your training courses, are they senior people? Do you get the directors on the course? Are they senior managers, or are they juniors that are told, go off and learn about this PPP theory and practice and come back and apply it? So do you get a cross section, and how would you describe the typical course course membership that you have?
Most of the courses that we have experience running were not public enrollment courses. That's where we're heading to now. But those were bids that MDBs, IFIs announced, and we won, and those would be normally specifically for one country. The focus of the group would be the PPP agency, the PPP unit of the country. The countries are mainly the ones which are new to PPPs. Where we have most experience is Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, now we hope Western Balkans, some more Eastern European countries, Russia later on. So the first batch would be mainly the PPP unit, and we normally see the head of the unit as one of the team, and depending on how large the unit is, we would have 20, 30, 40 people, and some then add-ons from people in different sectoral ministries, which are key, from the Ministry of Transport, Healthcare, Education, which are key to the current pipeline in that country. But we're pleased to see that quite often, quite high echelon people are involved. Deputy ministers, say in Ukraine, the Deputy Minister for Economy was part of the group, and it was a huge benefit for the whole group. They could consult her opinion on the local applications of this PPP theory.
You said earlier in our conversation that you're really excited by PPPs. I mean, that must be tremendous to have a government minister, a senior government minister in the training program, learning about PPPs that's going to influence and affect the way infrastructure is developed in that country. That must be a great thing every morning when you get up to do something like that. That must be very inspiring.
Yeah, that's very true. Not only the fact that there is a high-ranking official, but you see that there is this real impact that, at least in the economies which are relatively new to PPPs, they don't have a lot of prior experience, so they're quite open to global practices. And in one of the countries that we delivered the foundation course to recently, we know from the participants that every day after the course was over, remotely delivered, the head of the PPP agency got together with a few of the participants, the high-ranking ones, and they would have a discussion for half an hour of what they learned, and not in terms of passing the exam successfully, but so how does this compare with the PPP framework that they have? This is something we probably got wrong, or this is where we need to think of. And the transformational impact of CP3P was almost instant. And these are the things which really are emotionally rewarding for the trainer. Yeah. When you see that it's not just tick the box, we need this number of certified people, but you see people are hungry for experience. We never say goodbye first. So when we start the course, we enroll all of the participants in a WhatsApp group, Telegram group, and we always stay in touch. And when the course is over, people asking questions, we really enjoy sharing our vision, giving some advice if necessary. So yeah, that's when you see it has this impact. You are happy to contribute.
And do these senior people, are they happy to take an exam? Are they happy to prove that they've learnt the relevant information on the training course?
I'd say it's just a few cases I can remember, and it's not like thousands of people to draw a statistically representative conclusion. But the people I can remember, I feel they felt they need to be top of the group, and they really tried hard because if it's a question of authority, I believe. Yeah. So if you can't say I had a lot of work pressure. Everyone has work pressures. But yeah, they usually were one of the more experienced people, hardworking people, and in many cases, contributed a lot by speaking, answering questions from the audience. We learned a lot from them.
Yeah. Oh, it's great, isn't it? When you've got a client and they lead from the front.
Yes.
Must be really good. One of the things, though, that I've read about PPPs, well, not really about PPP, about infrastructure, my understanding is the world GDP is about $80 trillion, and that we need to spend about, whatever it is, $30 trillion to improve the infrastructure globally. Something of that over a period of years, clearly. And governments can't afford it. They have to involve the private sector to generate the investment funds necessary for infrastructure. In your work, in talking to these countries, as you say, that are starting with PPP, is this seen as a real issue, that the world can't afford the infrastructure that we need unless we can mobilise all of the forces where we can get finance from to create the world that people want to live in?
Yeah, it surely is recognized everywhere. These numbers, they resonate from, there was this influential research by McKinsey saying that the global infrastructure gap is $1 trillion a year. So you need to plug in $1 trillion just to maintain the level of an infrastructure, let alone develop it. And also there is another phrase which I heard from one conference speaking about this, where money can come from to infrastructure deals. And the phrase went on as financing is abundant, but funding is scarce. And this is one of the things we teach you on the course. That's what the CP book really tells you, the difference between funding and financing. There's a lot of money with banks, a lot of money, but there is scarcity of good projects. And in PPPs, the reason is there is not enough funding, meaning either budgets of sort of PFI type deals where the public sector pays. Public sector purse is stretched in every country. COVID didn't make it any easier. Or if it's a user pay project, how many projects do you have with good potential for people to pay for? Also, not very many. So people realize that these are potentially the limitations. But even if you have a limited public purse, there are so many things you can do about structuring in the best way the project. And many nations are primarily drawn into PPPs because you can finance a new hospital now. So you don't have funds, but you can build it with the private investors' money. But that's a short-term solution. That's the introduction why you got interested in PPPs in the first place. But ultimately, it's about better projects. If you can harness those efficiencies of the private sector, and you would make, even an authority with lots of money, they would, like the USA, Americans were not fast to adopt PPPs. It's very easy to raise funds in the USA. A municipality can issue bonds very easily. But later on, they became probably number one market in the world in PPPs when they realized it's a way to structure the deals where the efficiency of the private sector make the deal better, even if you could find it cheaper because your municipal bonds would be cheaper to raise.
We had PFI projects in the UK.
Yeah.
And at one time, they were seen to be the solution to a lot of public investment. But lately, they seem to have fallen out of favour in the UK. Is there any reason from your research and your discussions that you can think of why some countries have tried PFI or PPP and it worked for a time, but then it is no longer being used, whereas in other countries, they are still tending to use or want to use PFI, PPP type work in order to build infrastructure? Is there any conclusion, or is it simply a sign of the times?
It's one of the most challenging questions for every group that we start. We are perceived as a UK-based company, as we're supposed to know a lot about the UK experience, though I was never involved in any UK PPP deals. And the thing is, UK is the pioneer of PPPs. And when we introduce the concept to nations that are new to it, it's very counterintuitive to say, but by the way, UK basically stopped doing PFIs. You don't have any new PFI deals now. And it's a bit, so should we start it at all if people who did it for 20 years did no longer want it? And I can't say that I have a definitive answer to that. I believe that every nation has a very different setup of factors that influence how PPPs, whether they're effective or not. So you have the USA that we mentioned, not any less democratic, market-oriented economy than UK, but using PPPs quite efficiently. Also very open society in terms of media. So what was one of the factors why PFI suffered in the UK was, in my mind, media sensationalism, because you don't notice when there is, in the economic cycle, when times are hard and the private investor is maybe using some standby equity with saving the project for a few years, no one really reports about that. You don't see headlines, but hospital's still running okay because the investor didn't get any dividends. But when the cycle changes and suddenly there is information that there was lavish dividend payment to a PFI company, this hits the news, and this is grabbing the attention. I think that media sensationalism was one of the reasons for failure, or perceived failure in the UK. Another one, you can say, the democratic system. When you have two opposing parties, one promotes PFI, the other one says, no, the way for us to get into power is to say we will kill PFI. And when you do that, unlike many of the other nations, you have to stick to your manifesto. You have to do that, even if you don't think it makes sense. Brexit is probably one of the similar examples. So I can't say that the fact that there are no PFI deals in the UK now is totally make economic sense and is being reconsidered. But also other nations, they don't have these factors, and they have not taken this route yet. This road is just opening for them. They really need some of them to discover the benefits of competitive procurement, of not only traditionally procured public projects. So this is not to say that UK is not the ultimate kind of, this is the end of the scenario for everyone. I don't think so.
It's interesting when you say that, because I'm sure there's a PhD student somewhere going to investigate the investment of PFI in hospital building. So the UK had hospitals available when COVID hit. And surely there must be some huge benefit to the country because of that availability of infrastructure when we face the global pandemic. So it could be an interesting study for someone, but I'm sure that debate will run.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that there's different procurement methods. So when you're delivering a CP3P training course, which is clearly focused on PPP, do you cover the environment, the conditions that you need for a successful PPP? So everybody doesn't think, every procurement of infrastructure that we do within our region needs to be PPP. Do you contrast and compare the benefits?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very valid consideration. And I must say that the CP3P guide is very clear on saying that it is not advocating PPP as the best tool. And there are sections on the pros and cons on PPPs. There are pages on the disadvantages of PPPs, because every public sector official needs to be aware of both sides. It would be a shame to just for some reasons, and there may be public sector accounting reasons when there will be undue motivation to go for PPPs. And the guide dwells quite a lot seriously on do not do that. And of course, it gives you the continuum of different levels of interaction between public and private, starting with which is not yet PPP, then which is already not yet PPP or public. So it tells you about purely public, purely private, privatizations, other schemes, and the way you could think of which is the best match for you. Of course, PPPs is not a panacea. The guide gives you some understanding of how to approach this, and I would say that the IFIs that designed wanted to create this body of knowledge, with each of them now has a fund, a project preparation facility, and they are not PPP project preparation facilities. They're infrastructure enabling facilities. So all of the such infrastructure funds run by IFIs, they would give advice to the government, starting from looking for the perfect procurement model. It not necessarily will be a PPP. Quite often, your advisor from the World Bank or some other IFI would say, "We advise you to go this procurement way or privatization way, not necessarily PPP."
Interesting. So, within the CP3P guidance, what are your favorite, if that's the right word? Yeah, what are your favorite 3 pieces of advice or techniques or approaches that the guidance contains? That, if you only had 5 minutes with the Minister of Infrastructure for a country, what would be the 3 pieces of advice that you would like to get across to that person in that limited period of time?
I would dwell on maybe the first chapter or the first volume on the definition and the pros and cons. And one of those I definitely would speak of private finance as an incentive, as skin in the game. It's not just supplementing your budget. It's the motivational vehicle for ensuring that the private investor is motivated. There are PhDs and books written about how our mind is wired to perceive risks differently. So you would normally value losing $1 3 times as more painful than finding $1. So this is, if you invest something, it really makes a lot of a difference. Another one is importance of bundling. So in some of the nations we see competition agencies, antitrust bodies, who create a lot of difficulties for PPPs because they treat them as traditionally public procurement project. They want a separate bid for design, separate bid for construction, separate for operation. The importance of bundling and the long-term view for cost optimization for everything, that's very important if I were talking to a high-level public sector official. And the third one would be the importance of lenders, your sources of finance. Yes, there are 2 parties to a PPP agreement, public partner and private partner, but there is always this third party which is in the background. And your bilateral agreement is worth nothing if the lenders don't accept it. So you need to involve them early, and they are as another guardian of the resilience of the project. They're the conservative people who would normally make all sorts of haircuts to your projections, and they're not an enemy. They're not just source of money. They're a very important stakeholder to every good PPP.
Sergey, while I've got you for the day, one of the interesting things for me about infrastructure is what's the role of resilience now? So, how much importance are funders giving to whether the project plans for a PPP build in sustainability, build in resilience? Is that now one of the key assessment criteria for a good funded project?
It has always been one of the key criteria for a lender, specifically for a lender. It's very common in any course on project finance and PPP in particular to compare the perspectives of a sponsor and a project sponsor, investor, and a lender. And you would always see resilience, project stability, making 100% sure that you get your loan repaid as a top priority for the bank, whereas the investor wants more flexibility. The word resilience is not necessarily on top of the investor's agenda. And this is a balance, a debatable point. You have the Nassim Taleb's book on anti-fragile, where he says resilience is the bird word these days. You need to find projects which are anti-fragile, that can respond dynamically to something happening. But for PPPs, I think intrinsically they need a lot of robustness, because if you commit a lot of money upfront for a long time, then you have decisions on contingencies, on financial ratios, things which are conservative in nature. But it's a very challenging concept, because you can create all of this stability for 30-year concession, let's say for a parking project in an airport. And in 5 years, you have your Ubers, you have your driverless vehicles, and there is no demand. All of your financial ratios, all your standby equity would not matter. So then, apart from resilience, you need some adaptability. I would say, this is the call of the day. Adaptable, some provisions in your contract which would make it easier to get back to the table and to think, what do we do about this parking lot? Maybe we don't need it to be a parking. Let's make it something of a different kind of use, and let it be already provided for, this way of discussing it, rather than the project clearly collapsed, let's start a new one.
Interesting. Sergey, we could go on for hours, I think, because it's fascinating talking to you about your international experience on PPPs, your enthusiasm for CP3P, and fascinating for me how you're able to get the senior ministers from governments to come onto a training course to really understand and provide that leadership quality that every project, every investment needs to the rest of their team. Thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you so much, Richard. It was totally my pleasure.
Thank you for listening. We're always keen to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. You can find all the information in the show notes below. Please visit apmg-international.com to find out more about our accredited training and the certifications that support them that are related to the topics discussed in this series. I hope you've enjoyed today, and I look forward to you joining future episodes while we continue our exploration into best practice and the benefits it brings to global business. Thank you.